In the spring of 1943, German High Command faced a task that bordered on necromancy, rebuilding an army from ghosts. The Sixth Army had ceased to exist at Stalingrad on February the 2nd, when 90,000 starving men shuffled into Soviet captivity through the frozen ruins of the Barricadi factory district. Their Feldgrau uniforms hung from skeletal frames. Their boots had frozen to their feet. Of those 90,000, fewer than 6,000 would ever see Germany again, most dying in transit camps from typhus, dysentery, and simple starvation within the first months of captivity. Now, barely a year later, new divisions bearing the same cursed numeral assembled in the east. Their ranks filled with conscripts who whispered the name Stalingrad like an incantation against evil. The few survivors who had been evacuated before the final collapse carried the disaster in their bodies. In letters home, they used careful phrases, heavy experiences. What we went through cannot be told in letters, knowing censors would black out anything more honest. But in the barracks and aid stations, the trauma leaked through. Medical reports noted nervous heart, chronic sleeplessness, men who would freeze at the sound of wind across open ground. One Luftwaffe survivor, who had escaped the pocket before the capitulation, recalled that winter itself had become unbearable. The howling of the wind over the steppe triggered visions of comrades frozen stiff in their foxholes, clothing turned to ice on their bodies, skin blackened by frostbite and peeling away from the bone. The reconstituted Sixth Army absorbed these broken men into its new formations, and with them came the stories. NCO Joseph Sharfstein had kept a diary during the encirclement. His entries read like dispatches from a collapsing civilization. November 22, 1942, as Soviet tanks closed the trap. Russian tanks pass us and attack from the flank and rear. All are fleeing in panic. We make the 60-mile march through the steppe. He noted renewed attack at 1100 hours. Russian tanks and Katyusha rockets. All run away again. By December 6th, his handwriting had deteriorated, the letters cramped and uneven. The weather's getting worse. Clothing freezes on the body. 3 days did not eat, did not sleep. Fritz says I overheard them talking. The soldiers prefer to defect or surrender. Another sergeant, Helmut Megenberg of the Field Gendarmerie, had recorded the moment Soviet air superiority became absolute. November 23, 1942. After lunch, we are incredibly fired on by Russian planes. It's like nothing we ever felt, and German planes don't seem to see any. The following day. After lunch, a terrible fire. Our company has lost half its membership. Russian tanks driving around in our positions, planes attack us. We have dead and wounded. Now, in 1944, these memories haunted the rebuilt divisions like a contagion. Soldiers spoke darkly of the Stalingrad fluch, the Stalingrad curse, a conviction that the Sixth was marked for annihilation, that the army number itself carried death in its designation. That curse was about to be fulfilled, not by chance, but by design. The Sixth Army's position in Romania was a strategic trap from the moment they deployed. Behind them lay the Ploiești oil fields, producing 170,700 barrels per day in early 1944, 30% of all Axis petroleum. Without Romanian crude, the Panzer divisions would grind to a halt, the Luftwaffe would be grounded. The Reich's war machine would seize up like an engine run dry. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, had warned Hitler in May that oil was the weakest point in your armor. The attacks on Germany's oil industry, he told Allied interrogators after the war, were the most serious blow to our war economy. The Sixth Army wasn't defending territory. They were defending Germany's lifeblood. But the defenses were gossamer thin. Army Group South Ukraine, commanded by Generaloberst Johannes Friesner, stretched across 450 kilometers from the Prut River to the Black Sea. The German Sixth Army held the northern sector around Iasi, with 7 understrength divisions. The Eighth Army defended the south with 8 more. Between them, Romanian Third and Fourth Armies filled the gaps, nervous, poorly equipped formations that German staff officers privately called unreliable. One German officer wrote in his diary on August 15th, "The front was thin, the divisions under strength, and the Romanians were nervous. The Prut was low, but the river crossings were poorly prepared. We had no reserves to speak of." Across the river, unseen and unheard, the Soviets were assembling an avalanche. Marshals Rodion Malinovsky and Fyodor Tolbukin commanded 1,314,200 troops and 1,874 tanks, 3-to-1 numerical superiority achieved through Maskirovka deception so complete it bordered on magic. Dummy tanks made of canvas and wood appeared in the Carpathians, their silhouettes visible from German reconnaissance aircraft. False radio traffic simulated armies preparing to strike Hungary. Real forces moved only at night. Roads were muffled with straw. Cigarettes were forbidden. Tank engines hid under camouflage nets near Tiraspol and Dubasari. Soviet signal intelligence later reported, enemy radio intelligence detected increased traffic in the Carpathians and northern Ukraine, but failed to detect the real concentration in the Iasi-Kishinev sector. A Soviet tank commander with the 5th Guards Tank Army recalled the preparations. "We moved only at night. The roads were covered with straw to muffle the noise. We were told not to light cigarettes, not to talk loudly. The Germans never knew we were there until the artillery opened." And Hitler's Führerbefehl ensured there would be no escape. The order, issued on August 20th, read, "Army Group South Ukraine is ordered to hold every front position under all circumstances. A withdrawal is strictly forbidden. Every unit must fight to the last man and the last tank. Anyone who retreats will be shot." At 7:40 on the morning of August 20th, 1944, the Soviet double barrage rolled forward. The artillery preparation that had begun earlier that morning had already accomplished what weeks of fighting might not. The earth heaved, trenches collapsed inward. Men who had been sleeping in their dugouts woke buried alive, clawing at loose soil and shattered timber beams. Hauptmann Hans Diebisch of the 306th Infantry Division would later describe the totality of the destruction with clinical precision. The fire assets of the German defense were literally destroyed by the Soviet fighter bombers, attacking the main line of resistance and the rear positions. By the time the barrage lifted, almost no German artillery had survived. In a forward observation post east of Iasi, Unteroffizier Werner Krauss had been writing a letter to his sister in Breslau when the horizon turned white. The flash came before the sound, a wall of light that bleached the color from the sky, followed by a pressure wave that collapsed his chest and blew out his eardrums simultaneously. He found himself face down in loose dirt, the taste of chalk and copper filling his mouth. His helmet had disappeared. His hands were bleeding from fingernails torn away while clawing for purchase. The observation post, a reinforced bunker overlooking the Prut floodplain, no longer existed. Where the timber roof had been, open sky. Where his observation equipment had been, a crater smoking with cordite residue. Krauss dragged himself toward what remained of the communication trench. The air temperature had spiked 30 degrees in seconds, the heat from detonating high explosive creating localized thermal drafts that sucked the oxygen from his lungs. Each breath tasted of ammonia and hot brass. His hands found something soft in the debris. A face. Half a face. The left side of Gefreiter Baumann's head was intact, one blue eye staring at Krauss with an expression of mild confusion. The right side was simply gone, replaced by gray matter and bone fragments mixed with the sandy soil. The barrage walked closer. Krauss counted the intervals between impacts. 4 seconds. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. The Soviet gunners had calculated their fire precisely. The shells were advancing toward him at 15 meters per salvo. He ran. Behind him, the trench disappeared section by section, the earth opening like a zipper being pulled by an invisible hand. Men he had served with for 18 months ceased to exist in intervals measured in heartbeats. The sound was not thunder. Thunder ends. This was mechanical, relentless, the industrial rhythm of 15 100 artillery pieces, firing in coordinated sequence, their shells arriving in overlapping waves that created a continuous roar, broken only by the sharper crack of direct hits on fortifications. The Romanian 4th Mountain Division, under General Gheorghe Manoliu, and the 21st Division were annihilated within hours. The 306th Infantry Division lost 50% of its strength in the bombardment alone, not across days of fighting, but in the opening barrage, and was destroyed apart from local strongpoints by evening. The 15th Infantry Division suffered similarly catastrophic losses. When Soviet infantry appeared suddenly inside German positions, attempts to retreat dissolved under coordinated air attacks, mortar fire, and machine guns. One German survivor captured the speed of the collapse. By the end of the barrage, Russian tanks were deep into our position. Near the village of Skobalseni, close to Podu Iloaie, Romanian tank commander Ion Dumitriu's 1st Armored Division fought a desperate action that destroyed 60 Soviet tanks while losing 30 of their own, a tactical success rendered meaningless by the strategic catastrophe unfolding around them. After analyzing the day's results, Dumitriu's division retreated south. The gaps torn in the Axis line were already irreparable. By nightfall, Soviet forces had punched through fortifications up to 80 kilometers deep in some sectors, and exploitation forces were pouring through breaches measured not in meters, but in tens of kilometers. The encirclement had already begun. By dawn on August 21st, the veterans of Stalingrad knew exactly what was happening. The pattern was unmistakable: breakthrough, rapid exploitation, collapsing flanks. The tactical signatures were identical to the nightmare they had survived less than 2 years earlier. In captured letters and diaries, German soldiers described the experience with horrifying clarity. One Hauptmann's diary, recovered near the Prut River, recorded the moment Soviet tanks appeared inside German positions on August 20th. The same breakthrough, the same encirclement forming. We who survived the first death now face the second. Another letter, never sent, described the psychological weight more plainly. At Stalingrad, we did not know how it would end. Here we know. That is worse. Hauptmann Hans Diebisch, commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 579th Infantry Regiment, watched his defensive positions evaporate under Soviet assault. His battalion, like the entire 306th Division, had disintegrated on day 1. By day 2, survivors were scattered across the Romanian countryside, unit cohesion shattered. The psychological curse the 6th Army had carried since its reconstitution now became physical reality. Veterans recognized what was coming: the tightening noose, the shrinking pocket, the final collapse. But Hitler's rigid no-retreat orders prevented any organized withdrawal. Units that might have escaped the encirclement were commanded to hold positions that no longer existed on any meaningful map. On the road to the Prut crossings, Hauptfeldwebel Otto Brenner sat atop his Panzer IV, stripped to his waist despite regulations, his skin lobster red and peeling across his shoulders. The temperature inside the hull exceeded 50 degrees Celsius, hot enough to blister flesh on contact with bare metal. His driver had burned his palm on the gear lever that morning and now operated with one hand wrapped in a field dressing soaked through with sweat and serum. The column hadn't moved in 40 minutes. Ahead, the road to the Prut crossing was jammed with vehicles for 3 kilometers, half-tracks, horse-drawn wagons, staff cars, ambulances with their red crosses meaningless against Soviet fighter bombers that attacked anything that moved. A dead horse lay across the road's center, bloated in the heat, its abdomen distended with gas until it resembled a gray balloon ready to burst. The smell reached Brenner from 200 meters away. Sweet decay mixed with the petroleum stink of leaking fuel tanks and the sharper odor of human waste from the ditches where men relieved themselves in full view of the column, because there was no cover and no time for modesty. "Jabos!" someone screamed. Brenner looked up. 3 Ilyushin ground attack aircraft emerged from the eastern haze, their silhouettes unmistakable. Broad wings, bulbous fuselages, the characteristic hump of the cockpit. The column dissolved into chaos. Men leaped from vehicles and sprinted for the drainage ditches. Horses reared and kicked, tangling their traces. One driver attempted to reverse his truck and collided with the ambulance behind him, the impact throwing wounded men from the open bed. Brenner dropped through the commander's hatch and pulled the cover closed. The first pass came low, 50 meters off the deck, so close he could see the pilot's goggles through the cockpit glass. The aircraft's cannons made a sound like tearing canvas, 23mm shells walking across the column in neat lines that turned trucks into funeral pyres and men into anatomical diagrams. A shell punched through the engine deck of the Panzer III in front of him. The vehicle shuddered, lurched sideways, and began to burn. He watched through his vision slit as the driver's hatch opened and a figure emerged wreathed in flames, moving with terrible purpose for 3 steps before collapsing across the hull. The Ilyushin circled and made a second pass. By the time they departed, 17 vehicles were burning. The road was completely blocked. The Prut crossing, 12 kilometers ahead, might as well have been on the moon. Malinovsky's 2nd Ukrainian front struck from the north, while Tolbukin's 3rd Ukrainian front closed from the south. The coordination was flawless. 2 massive Soviet formations, separated by hundreds of kilometers of front, converged on schedule with the precision of a closing vise. Radio communications between the fronts maintained perfect synchronization despite the chaos of rapid advance. The pincers were designed to meet near Chisinau, and they were moving exactly according to plan. German units found themselves watching their escape routes disappear in real time. The roads west, the only paths to potential safety, were being cut by Soviet mobile groups racing deep into the rear. By August 23rd, the encirclement was complete, 100 kilometers deep. The German 6th Army, along with portions of the 8th Army and Romanian forces still fighting alongside them, were trapped in pockets around Jassy and Kishinev. The German 13th Panzer Division ceased to exist as an effective fighting force on August 23rd. The 306th Infantry Division, which had lost 50% of its strength on the first day, was now reduced to isolated strongpoints with no communication and no hope of relief. On the evening of August 23rd, as the encirclement tightened around the doomed German armies, King Michael summoned Marshal Antonescu to the royal palace in Bucharest. The meeting began at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. For 2 hours, the young king pressed Romania's dictator to sign an armistice with the Allies. Antonescu refused flatly, insisting they must fight on. Then Michael spoke the prearranged code phrase, "Well, I'm very sorry, but there's nothing else I can do." A door opened. 3 non-commissioned officers and a captain entered and seized the stunned marshal. He turned to General Sănătescu and asked simply, "What is this?" Before anyone could answer, he was led away without resistance to a small room on the 2nd floor, guarded by palace gendarmes. At 10 o'clock that night, Michael's voice came over Romanian state radio. In the streets of Bucharest, trams halted. Soldiers lowered their rifles. Civilians gathered around radio sets in apartment courtyards and cafe windows. "Romanians," the king announced. "The war continues, but from today, Romania has changed sides. The government of Marshal Antonescu has been dismissed. A new government has been formed, which will immediately begin negotiations with the Allied powers for an armistice. The Romanian army will cease hostilities against the Soviet Union and will turn its weapons against Nazi Germany." The broadcast lasted less than 2 minutes. It transformed a catastrophic German defeat into total annihilation. In the German embassy compound in Bucharest, Obergefreiter Karl Hoffmann was asleep in the courtyard garage when the first burst of Romanian machine gun fire shattered the windows. He rolled off his cot and grabbed for his rifle in complete darkness, his fingers finding only empty canvas and grease-stained concrete. Someone was screaming in German, high-pitched, continuous, the particular sound of a man gut-shot and aware of what that meant. Found his weapon under the cot's metal frame and crawled toward the garage door. The courtyard had become a killing field. Muzzle flashes from the surrounding buildings painted the embassy facade in strobe light glimpses. Shattered masonry, running figures, a Gestapo agent in civilian clothes attempting to cross the open ground and being cut in half by converging fire. The Romanian soldiers on the perimeter weren't firing warning shots. They were firing to kill. Hoffman pressed himself against the cold stone wall and tried to think. 20 minutes ago, the Romanians had been allies, sharing rations, trading cigarettes, complaining about officers and mutually broken German-Romanian pidgin. Now they were executing every German uniform they could see. A staff car attempted to exit through the main gate. Its headlights illuminated the machine gun nest set up on Iasi-Kishinev, the barrel tracking the vehicle's movement with practiced calm. The gunner waited until the car was fully exposed, then fired. The windshield dissolved. The car veered left, mounted the curb, and struck a lamppost. No one emerged. Within hours, Romanian troops opened fire on their former allies throughout the country. At Băneasa airfield, Romanian anti-aircraft batteries destroyed 6 German aircraft attempting evacuation. The sky filled with smoke from burning planes, the acrid petroleum stench drifting across the capital's northern suburbs. In the mountain passes west of Brașov, Romanian artillery batteries established positions overlooking the Predeal Pass, the main escape route toward Hungary. German convoys jammed the roads, half-tracks, and horse-drawn wagons stretching for kilometers. On August 26th, Romanian 75mm guns opened fire. A Romanian artillery officer later described the engagement. "We set up our batteries on the slopes above Predeal. The road was jammed with German trucks, half-tracks, and horse-drawn wagons. They didn't expect us to turn against them. On the 26th of August, we opened fire with 75mm guns and mortars. The explosions lit up the pass. The air grew thick with smoke and the smell of burning fuel. Thousands of German soldiers abandoned their vehicles and attempted escape through the forests. The trap had become absolute. Between August 23rd and 31st, Romanian forces captured 56,000 German prisoners and killed 5,000 more in scattered fighting. Inside the shrinking pockets, the Sixth Army died twice. By August 22nd, 3 days into the offensive, divisions had ceased to exist as tactical units. Franz Josef Strauss of Panzer Regiment 4 later recalled the simple, terrible truth. The division had ceased to exist as a tactical unit on the 3rd day of the Soviet offensive. The enemy was everywhere. The pattern was instantly familiar to Stalingrad veterans. First came the ammunition shortages. By the 2nd day, organized resupply had become impossible. Soviet mobile groups were already deep in the rear, destroying supply depots and overrunning rear installations. German infantry units fired their last magazines into the dust clouds of approaching Soviet armor, then waited with bayonets fixed. In a field hospital inside the pocket, Sanitätsgefreiter Heinrich Voss faced a decision no medic should make. The morphine had run out on the 3rd day. Voss had been a medical orderly for 27 months, through Kursk and Korsun-Cherkasy and a dozen nameless actions across Ukraine. He had removed shrapnel from screaming men without anesthetic. He had held soldiers' hands while they bled out from wounds no surgeon could repair. He thought he understood suffering. He was wrong. The field hospital, a requisitioned barn in a village whose name he'd never learned, contained 147 wounded men. The number had been 162 that morning, but 15 had died since dawn, and there was nowhere to put the bodies except outside against the barn's eastern wall, where they lay in a row, their faces covered with bloody bandages, because no one had enough clean cloth for shrouds. The smell was catastrophic. Gangrene had set into the compound fractures. The belly wounds had begun to putrefy. The latrine pit behind the barn was overflowing because no one had strength to dig a new one, and the August heat accelerated decomposition until the air itself seemed to rot. A Feldwebel with both legs amputated above the knee was weeping. Not from pain, the nerve endings were dead, but from thirst. There had been no water delivery in 18 hours. The village well had been hit by Soviet artillery that morning, its stones scattered across the square, its water mingling with the blood of the two men who'd been drawing from it when the shell landed. "Water," the Feldwebel whispered. "Please, water." Voss had nothing to give him. Outside, the sound of Soviet artillery grew closer. The shells were walking toward the village in methodical increments, calculated destruction advancing at the pace of a strolling man. "We have to evacuate," someone said. Voss looked at the wounded, 147 men. Perhaps 30 could walk. Perhaps 15 could be carried on the two remaining stretchers. The rest would have to stay. He began making selections. The Feldwebel watched him approach other beds, watched him shake his head at some patients and nod at others. Understanding spread across his face like dawn light. "You're leaving us," he said. His voice was calm. Voss couldn't answer. "I was at Stalingrad," the Feldwebel said. "I flew out on the last Junkers, January 31st, 1943. Do you know what I saw from the air? Thousands of men, standing in the snow, waiting to die." The artillery sounded again, closer now. "I thought I'd escaped," the Feldwebel said. "I thought I'd cheated it." The last thing Voss heard as he left the barn was the Feldwebel's whisper. "The curse follows the number." German columns arrived at the Prut River to find Soviet tanks already dug in on the far bank. Machine gun fire raked the approaches. Bodies floated downstream in the August heat. The psychological collapse came faster than at Stalingrad. Then, men had held out for weeks, clinging to the hope of relief. Now, in August 1944, they knew better. When Romanian artillery opened fire from blocking positions in the rear on August 24th, unit discipline shattered. Soldiers abandoned vehicles and fled into the forests. Some units simply stopped fighting, waiting for Soviet infantry to accept their surrender. Near Giurgiu, on August 30th and 31st alone, 9,000 German prisoners laid down their weapons in a single event. They walked in silence. Gefreiter August Lehmann had dropped his rifle somewhere on the road 3 kilometers back. He couldn't remember precisely where. It no longer mattered. The column stretched ahead and behind, for as far as he could see, 9,000 German soldiers shuffling east under guard, their uniforms caked in dust, their boots torn, their faces blank with exhaustion. Soviet guards flanked the column on horseback, their submachine guns resting across their saddles. They didn't need to aim. Where would anyone run? The steppe extended to every horizon, flat and featureless, offering no concealment. The sun beat down without mercy. Lehmann's tongue felt like a leather strap in his mouth. His lips had cracked open that morning, and he'd licked the blood without thinking, which had only made the thirst worse. The man beside him, a Feldwebel from some supply unit, his rank insignia torn away, stumbled and fell. He didn't get up. 2 Soviet guards rode over, dismounted, checked for vital signs, and left him where he lay. No one in the column broke stride. No one looked back. A Romanian soldier approached the column's edge and spat. "Hitleristi," he said. The word required no translation. Lehmann thought about the letters in his pocket, correspondence from his wife in Königsberg, her neat handwriting describing their daughter's first steps, the garden they would plant after the war, the life they would resume when he came home. He'd been carrying those letters for 7 months. He reached into his tunic, removed the bundle, and let it fall. The column marched over the pages without breaking stride. When the pocket evaporated, what remained was a scale of destruction that staggered comprehension. 200,000 German troops were gone in 9 days, not wounded and evacuated, not withdrawn to new positions, gone. The German Sixth Army, reconstituted after Stalingrad, rebuilt division by division, sent to defend Romania with solemn promises that history would not repeat, had been annihilated for the second time in less than 2 years. 18 German divisions ceased to exist as coherent formations. Entire corps vanished from Wehrmacht order of battle maps, Army Group South Ukraine, which had fielded 905,000 men and 170 tanks on August 19th, no longer existed. Marshal Tolbukin characterized the operation as a second Stalingrad, and the comparison was mathematically justified. Over 400,000 Axis casualties in 10 to 12 days. The rate of annihilation exceeded 30,000 per day, faster than virtually any encirclement in military history. Stalingrad had taken 5 months. This had taken less than 2 weeks. Ploiešt's refineries ceased production on August 22nd as Soviet forces closed in. Germany lost its single most critical resource, the oil fields that supplied 60% of the Reich's crude oil and a quarter of all Axis refined fuel products. The Wehrmacht's vehicles, the Luftwaffe's aircraft, all depended on Romanian petroleum. Now the pipelines ran dry. By September, fuel allocations collapsed. Panzer divisions received supplies measured in days, not weeks. Training flights were canceled across the Luftwaffe. Pilot instruction dropped from months to weeks, with barely enough gasoline for basic familiarization. Entire armored formations sat immobilized, their tanks useless monuments to a war machine suddenly paralyzed. When news reached Berlin of Romania's defection and the loss of Ploiești, Hitler raged at the treachery. 400,000 casualties protecting the oil fields, and the oil lost anyway. As German forces fled the Balkans in late August, Anglo-American newspapers filled their front pages with different stories entirely. On September 18th, the New York Times heralded Operation Market Garden with maps, photographs of transport aircraft filling Dutch skies, and breathless accounts of the daring gamble for the Rhine bridges. 3 weeks earlier, the Red Army had annihilated an entire German army group in 10 days, 400,000 casualties, 18 divisions destroyed, Romania knocked out of the Axis, yet Western coverage reduced it to wire service snippets about Romania quits Axis. David Glantz would later observe that Soviet offensives like Iasi-Kishinev rarely receive the analysis they deserve in Western narratives, victims of Cold War dynamics that gave disproportionate attention to Anglo-American theaters while underestimating or ignoring the vast majority of Red Army offensives. Paris's liberation on August 25th received iconic coverage, de Gaulle striding down the Champs-Élysées, crowds weeping, bells pealing across the city. The Eastern Front remained arrows on maps, abstractions of space and numbers, its greatest victories erased by deliberate forgetting. Hans Diebisch, whose battalion was destroyed by Soviet airstrikes on the first day, later recalled that his men's final words were not prayers or patriotic slogans, but bitter acknowledgments. Stalingrad again. The curse had proven prophecy. In an isolated strongpoint inside the pocket, Lieutenant Erich Vogel sat in the remains of a stone farmhouse, his back against the wall where the kitchen had been, his pistol resting on his knee. 23 men had held this position 48 hours ago. 7 remained. The cellar where they'd stored ammunition had taken a direct hit that morning. The explosion had killed 4 men instantly and scattered the remaining rounds across a crater 15 meters wide. They'd spent 2 hours collecting what they could find, crawling through debris that still smoked. The final count, 67 rifle rounds, 11 pistol rounds, 2 stick grenades, no water, no food since yesterday, no contact with any other German unit. Vogel had been at Stalingrad, not in the pocket. He'd been wounded in the leg during the September street fighting and evacuated before the encirclement closed. He'd spent January 1943 in a hospital in Breslau, listening to radio reports that grew progressively grimmer until they simply stopped. He'd thought the wound was a curse. Now he understood it had been salvation. Lieutenant Unteroffizier Brandt crawled through the gap where the front door had been. His face was gray with dust, his lips cracked and bleeding. Movement in the orchard. Vogel looked through his field glasses. Soviet soldiers were filtering through the apple trees 300 meters south, their khaki uniforms blending with the late summer foliage. He counted 12, 14, 20, more than their remaining ammunition could address. "How many rounds do you have?" he asked Brandt. 9. Vogel removed the letter he'd been writing, half a page to his mother, unfinished, and placed it in his breast pocket. There was no one to mail it to now. The Soviet soldiers reached the edge of the orchard. They were organizing for a final rush. 11 rounds, Vogel said. 27 men. We'll make them count. History's cruelest repetition was not that the Sixth Army died twice, but that it died twice knowing. 400,000 men lost protecting oil fields that were lost anyway. 200,000 prisoners marched into captivity. The Sixth Army destroyed twice, its survivors bearing witness to repetition so precise it transcended coincidence into prophecy. The Soviet soldiers reached the farmhouse wall at 1647. Vogel fired until his pistol locked back on an empty magazine. Grenades detonated. Stone fragments peppered his face. A boot appeared in his peripheral vision. He looked up. The Soviet soldier was young, 18 perhaps, his face sunburned and impassive. He held his submachine gun at waist level. "Ruki Verk," the soldier said. "Hands up." Vogel released his empty pistol. It clattered against the stone floor. He thought of Stalingrad. He thought of the 90,000 who had surrendered there and the 6,000 who had returned. The soldier gestured with his weapon. Vogel raised his hands and stood. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.